So in November, Ohio voters will be voting on issue 1, which would decide whether or not to codify abortion rights into law in the state of Ohio. And so far, it looks like this issue is going to pass very overwhelmingly. So we're going to talk about issue 1. We're going to talk about the issue 1 back in the fall, which basically would have raised the threshold for the constitutional amendments in Ohio, and also the issue of abortion more broadly and how it pertains to the Republican Party and sort of their future on this issue, since as of right now, it looks like the Republican position on abortion is incredibly unpopular, and there's really no sign of that changing anytime soon. So we're going to talk about all of that in just a second, but first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So issue 1 basically states, as per the text of the ballot measure, every individual has the right to make and carry out one's own reproductive decisions, included but not limited to decisions on contraception, fertility treatment, continuing one's own pregnancy, miscarriage care, and abortion, which honestly I think 3 and 5 are essentially the same, but the second part of this amendment basically says the state shall not directly burden, penalize, prohibit, etc. An individual's voluntary right to do this. So this ballot measure would basically protect people's access to abortion and prevent them from being punished by the state for having it. And this issue so far is polling very highly. If we take a look at the polls for issue 1, every single poll without fail has the issue polling at least 20 points in favor. This is very interesting because the No campaign has actually outraised the Yes campaign based on figures that I've seen. A lot of pro-life groups have put a lot of money into this amendment. And honestly, this was doomed to fail from the get-go. Much redder states, when put to the voters, amendments that have been used to try and restrict abortion have failed pretty overwhelmingly. If we take a look at the state of Montana, for instance, this was back during the 2022 midterms. This was a bill that essentially would have said doctors needed and were required to resuscitate infants that were born alive at any gestational age, so at any stage in the pregnancy, and this would have been mandated by law. This actually failed around 53 to 47, so 6 points. The pro-choice side essentially defeated the pro-life side in the deep red state of Montana. Now, again, this is a state that voted for Donald Trump by 16 points. So you do have a decent number of right-leaning independents and Republicans voting in favor of the pro-choice side on this amendment. We could also take a look at the state of Kentucky, which is considerably redder than the state of Montana and much more socially conservative. And you'll see a very similar result to what we saw in Montana. The pro-choice side winning in this case around 52-48. This amendment basically stating that there's no right to an abortion in the state constitution. Of course, it failed by 4 points. And you'll notice, as with the Montana map, a lot of these even ex-urban counties that are probably safe red on the presidential level are voting against this amendment pretty overwhelmingly, in some cases by high double digits. You really only have these rural, less populated, very socially conservative counties, much more religious counties of voting on the pro-life side of this. So looking at Ohio, we can kind of get a sense of where this amendment is going to end up. We could take a look at the original issue 1, which was slightly different than the issue 1 that's being voted on in November. This would have essentially raised the threshold in the state constitution for ballot measures to become law. It's currently 50+1. Now, of course, it would be 60%. If this amendment had actually passed, it failed 57-43. And the same holds true for this election map as with Kentucky and Montana. You have even counties that vote safe red in presidential elections. Trumbull County, for instance, 57-43. On the pro-choice side, it's voting around 10 points for Donald Trump. You can look at Ashtabula County, 61-37 in favor of Donald Trump. This county also narrowly rejected this amendment, so on and so forth. So northeastern Ohio is much more white working class, manufacturing, less so socially conservative. You have these smaller, much more rural counties voting in favor of the amendment, but by much smaller margins. So that's basically what we're looking at in terms of Ohio. Again, the polling for issue 1 is overwhelming. Ohio voters will probably pass this amendment by a much larger margin than they rejected the original issue 1. And it's because the original issue 1 wasn't as in your face as the issue 1 being voted on in November. Issue 1 back in September was talking about the constitutional threshold for ballot measures. This is explicitly asking about the issue of abortion. And as you can imagine, female voters, liberal voters, independent voters are going to be incredibly mobilized by this. So, abortion is one of those issues that Republicans, I think, for at least the next decade, are going to be bogged down by, because independent suburban voters are very against the Republicans' position on abortion, especially when you have Republicans in very red states in the Deep South advocating for restrictions on abortion with no exceptions, life of the mother, all that stuff basically thrown out the window. So that looks extremely radical to your average median American voter, especially since abortion protections were removed nationally since Roe v. Wade was struck down by the Supreme Court. So this is a massive issue that galvanizes Democratic voters from across the country. And basically in every state outside the Deep South, this is an issue that's going to hurt Republicans. Kansas, which is a safe Republican state, rejected a pro-life amendment 58-42. That was sort of the wake-up call, I think, for the abortion issue. And I foolishly thought that voters would differentiate more between abortion and the Republican Party, but it's really become clear that a lot of voters see abortion and the Republicans as one and the same. Republicans are the party of no abortions with no exceptions. Democrats are the party that allow people to make those decisions on their own. And again, this issue is very unpopular with the electorate, to put it bluntly, and a lot of pro-life Republicans don't want to hear that, but that's just the truth of the matter. Republicans will continue to lose if they campaign openly on wanting to restrict abortion. Even in safe red states, if that is the number one issue, it's going to hurt the Republicans. And that really poses a big question as to 2024, because Donald Trump has touted the fact that he appointed these Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe v. Wade, while also in the same breath condemning other Republicans like Ron DeSantis for being too harsh on the issue of abortion. So Trump is really trying to have it both ways. He's trying to appease the pro-life faction of the Republican Party, which is about 2/3 of the Republican base, saying that Roe v. Wade being overturned was his doing, and conversely trying to win over independents by basically saying that he wouldn't have gone as far as a lot of the other Republicans did. So you can bet that 2024 is going to be an election where abortion's talked about. Joe Biden and the Democrats are already trying to make abortion one of these central issues, because again, now that there's no protections for abortion up to a certain point, any state can restrict abortion as much as they want to. And that played a pretty big issue in the 2022 midterms. One of the states where abortion was front and center was the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania by no means is a conservative state. It is a swing state, but in the governor's election between Doug Mastriano and Josh Shapiro, you had Doug Mastriano, who basically implied that women who have abortions could be subject to the death penalty in the state, going up against Josh Shapiro, who's pretty much your run-of-the-mill Democrat with a little hint of progressivism. And as you can see, he lost monumentally. Doug Mastriano was defeated by nearly 15 points. A really embarrassing showing, considering the fact that Pennsylvania only went to Joe Biden by 1.2% just 2 years earlier. So that goes to show you just how potent the issue of abortion is. And, Doug Mastriano had a laundry list of other issues. He was a January 6er. He said a number of other very controversial things that played very poorly in the suburbs and even in the rural areas. One of the things a lot of Republicans, analysts like myself had said was that, Mastriano's social conservatism, his Trumpism, all this stuff was going to galvanize rural voters in a way that somebody like Dr. Oz, your generic Republican, could never do. And that simply was just a lie. That wasn't true. That was something that a lot of us bought into, including myself, when I said that Doug Mastriano had somewhat of a shot at the governorship. But, looking at the whole race in hindsight, he had absolutely no chance. And, any other Republican that runs a campaign like his would have no chance. Now, again, abortion wasn't his only issue, but I just highlight that because that was something that Josh Shapiro and the Democrats in the state campaigned on very heavily. It was also an issue that actually hurt Dr. Oz, because Dr. Oz has sort of made some weird statement during the debate that I think was a mistake, where he essentially said that, abortion should be an issue decided by doctors, community members, and then local political leaders. And, Democrats, of course, took the local political leaders part out of it and sort of used that to scare their voters out to the polls. And it worked. Dr. Oz lost by around 5 points. So, going ahead to 2023, I think issue 1 is going to pass overwhelmingly. This could probably give Republicans in Ohio a chance to not really talk about the issue. But the leading candidate for Senate in Ohio so far, Frank LaRose, who is the current Secretary of State, has made a big issue of campaigning against this amendment. And, Frank LaRose has been traveling around the state of Ohio, trying to go to these pro-life rallies, with Mike Pence, J.D. Vance, trying to defeat this amendment. So this gives Sherrod Brown, who is the incumbent Democratic senator in Ohio, something to campaign on against Frank LaRose, because this amendment is going to pass overwhelmingly, and Frank LaRose has really tied himself to the losing position on that issue. So while he's doing this because he probably is personally pro-life and he wants to get obviously the support of big pro-life groups, it's probably going to backfire in 2024 and at least hurt him somewhat in the general election, if not tank his campaign entirely. Now, Ohio is still a pretty red state, as I mentioned. This is a state that voted for Donald Trump by 8 points, so Frank LaRose could afford to lose some voters in the suburbs of Ohio. But, Sherrod Brown is already an incumbent. He's won re-election multiple times, 2006, 2012, 2018. He's running again. And he's one of the Democratic senators that Republicans need to defeat if they want to take back the Senate. And, tying yourself to this issue, I think is a very big mistake. So going ahead, Republicans need to be very smart about the issue of abortion. Quite honestly, the talking point that Democrats are the more extreme party on abortion just doesn't work, especially when you have the consensus in America, the median consensus being that abortion is something that is a personal decision. At least 66%, depending on the poll you look at, anywhere from like 59 to 66% of Americans think that. So you really have to be very tactical about this issue because you're on the losing side of it. You're on the minority side of it. And that's something that Republican strategists are going to have to come up with, how they actually message on the issue effectively, not compromising their principles, but also being smart and not scaring away swing voters. And of course, keeping true to their conservative values and sort of holding on to that pro-life base in the GOP. So anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.